panel discussion of this year's Lviv Media Forum. My name is Victoria Narizhna, and I have an honor to be a moderator of this last panel. Thank you all for your stamina. I understand that everyone is very tired now, and networking seems like a better option, but here you are, and that's wonderful. This last panel discussion has a title, Nurturing a Free Society, Public Health, Self-Governance and Justice in Focus. And it is organized in partnership with Health Solutions for Open Society. It is a foundation created as an analytical center and dialogue platform whose mission is to take care of the individual as the highest value in the architecture of the new social contract, and to make health an integral part of the optics that should be applied to any social transformations. And let me tell a few words to set a frame for our discussion. We often understand health as something relevant only in a physician's office or on pages of fitness blogs. But if you understand health not as an absence of disease, but as an ability to live to your highest potential and be fully integrated into society, the notion of health becomes something more than the state of the body. It becomes a lens and a power metaphor. Health Solutions Foundation proposes to look at our topics today through such a lens. In times of war, surgeons encounter disproportionately high numbers of polytrauma cases, with a severity rarely heard of in peaceful life. And any doctor would tell you that a person who endured polytrauma has a painful, complicated, and uncertain path of recovery ahead of them. To live in a country plunged into the horrors of war means to feel often how your individual body dissolves into the collective body of your wounded society. Sometimes it's frightening. It feels like you are losing your personality and everything narrows to collective needs and collective motives. But most times it is very supportive and soothing to feel this oneness with the people also affected by war, and to feel you belong to some larger entity, able and willing to fight. The collective body of Ukrainian society now goes through a polytrauma of war. That is why speaking of our post-war recovery in health metaphors seems appropriate. Will freedom and justice become a cure for our collective psyche, traumatized by the horrors of war? How will the skeleton of this collective Ukrainian body, its communities, function in the future? How we will take care of individual human bodies when the physical and mental health of hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians has changed irreversibly since the beginning of the full-scale war? And last but not least, when and by what means the Ukrainian collective body becomes sufficiently cleansed of the disease of war so that European community will not be afraid to let it into its circle. So these are complicated and delicate questions, but we have experts on the panel who will help us with the task to answer them. And let me introduce them to you. Name is Svitlana Khilyuk, Dean to the Law School at the Ukrainian Catholic University in Lviv. Next is Victoria Tymashevska, the Executive Director of Health Solution for Open Society Foundation, and Arsen Zhumadilov, Head of the Defense Procurement Reform Team at the Change Support Office and co-founder of the June 26 initiative. Thank you for coming. And before I give our speakers the floor, let me inform you all about our schedule. First, our speakers will have short speeches about these topics, public health, self-governance, and justice. And then, after each speech, you could ask some clarifying questions, maybe, for 10 minutes or so. And then, after all speeches, we would dive into the discussion of the issues raised. So, let me start with Victoria.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure. And before I dive into a few messages that I wanted to share, I want to take a 10-second pause to remember the fallen doctors and nurses, felchers, and all the staff of clinics that died due to the war this unprecedented time. Thank you. They are defending the battlefields the same as the soldiers, as the commanders, as the generals. But as we speak of the health as an individual and collective, we surely are thinking already and dreaming about the deoccupation and the freedom that will be the genuine core part of our society, of our reunited society across Donetsk, Crimea, Lugansk, and other territories that are currently under occupation. Almost everybody, or few of you who have the bags that have a very meaningful, for me, notion of freedom requires truth, truth requires freedom. In my mind, it was about freedom requires health, and health requires freedom. Why do you think this is relevant? It is relevant because once you are not feeling yourself, both physically, mentally, emotionally, you can't fight. And in order to fight, you need that health. And you are fighting for the health as we redefine health. Because it's not about only medical issues, about doctors and nurses. It's about the healthy society in which justice, human rights, freedom, dignity are not only words, but they're practiced in everyday lives. I want to recall a few moments of what are the societies or communities of occupied territories have suffered through the invasion, and how health was used as an instrument for manipulation. Immediately upon the arrival of Russian forces, either to Crimea or to Bucha, they listed the health providers, the doctors who supported and provided care to Ukrainian soldiers, territorial defense, and either killed them on the spot or forced them to serve and provide care to the Russian occupants. They deprived medicines and health supplies from civilians and used them to treat Russian wounded soldiers, violating all the humanitarian laws and laws of war. Such deprivation of medical care was constantly used also to manipulate the civilians even further after the few months of occupation in terms of applying for Russian passports in return for statutory health insurance in Crimea, supporting the temporarily occupation forces in communities in Bucha, Kharkiv Oblast, Kherson Oblast. We've seen this as yet another tool of war, and as we are dreaming of deoccupation, we are dreaming of how we nurture and develop the healthy health systems that will support healthy society. When we talk about how we can bring not only Ukrainian experience, because indeed health reform was one of the first reforms that was implemented after the Revolution of Dignity, and we talked about how this was among the few three demands of the society: justice reform, human rights, and health reform, and anti-corruption. And that's what I think the demand on the territories that are currently occupied, and we are hoping that will be deoccupied soon. Thanks.
Thank you very much. So, do you have any maybe questions for now. Do you want Victoria to say something more about? Okay, let me ask one question, please. I understand that there will be challenges for the health system on these deoccupied territories to meet. What they are and what we can do about them.
Well, there will be multiple challenges because there are territories that have not been with Ukraine for almost 10 years. And through these years, we've transitioned from very totalitarian approaches in healthcare system with strong vertical system from Ministry of Health to the departments of health to the hospital to a human-centered reform where not only the money goes after the patient and you can choose your provider, you can choose your doctor, you can choose your health facility, you can even choose your place where you want to get treated, whether it's in Lviv or Odessa or Kiev, but also the whole reform was designed to serve person's need. And we talked a lot about ethics, about humanistic approaches, about communication and dynamic between the doctor and the patient. We also talked about human dignity, about access to resuscitation, reanimation units. We talked about the patient's rights. We talked about informed consent. A lot of that is not an issue of discussion in Russian society, which is vertical, where you have the dynamic between an ordering physician or health staff and the object of a patient, a body that is treated, where we see a human being in the center of the process, and therefore this changes the mentality.
Yes, when we talked later, you used words totalitarian medicine, and this is it. So from the individual human body to their communities in which this body exists, Arsen Zhumadilov is co-founder of the June 26 initiative, which aim is to think forward about the future of Crimea, as I understand. So your understanding of the future of Ukraine as a whole is very special. So please tell us more about it.
Not that much special as you could expect, але я хочу почати з поняття гідності.
I would like to start with the concept of dignity. The foundation supporting this panel discussion centers around this fundamental principle that lay in the basis of the health reform that started back in 2016, 2017, and it was all about dignity. The centerpiece of this reform should not be the state, should not be the government, not some sort of vague idea. It's not about social norms. The centerpiece of this reform is human dignity. When we are talking about dignity, it's a transversal principle that can be a ground for any policy. So let's briefly talk about how we build regional policy in our country. There are two approaches thereof. One of the approaches is a classical one that views the state as a sovereign entity that has the fullness of power, and then this power is sort of shared as a favor with communities. This is one approach. It's still quite commonplace. As part of this approach, mayors express their gratitude to the government. Thank you for having devolved some powers to us. But there's another approach, modern or even maybe postmodern approach, but it's definitely more contemporary. Within this approach, we view power as an entity or essence that comes out of human relationships, and then people decide themselves what they want to delegate upwards. But by default, power, authorities, responsibilities stay on the ground at local level. If we use the second approach as a basis, then we might see some interesting developments unraveling. Then we have a completely different understanding and perception. We will see that our communities are much more capable of doing things, and there doesn't have to be nationwide consensus. they can implement a lot of the things that are required. And we're talking about a wide variety of social goods, like, for example, national safety and security and defense. So there are certain things that require a nationwide consensus, but at the same time, there are certain things that do not really require this across the country consensus. And all these things, by default, should be the responsibility that lies on the shoulders of communities. You might be wondering, where is the place of dignity here? During the previous panel discussion, there was a question about how we can integrate combat veterans into social life. As part of the 26th of June initiative, we explored how we could integrate the Crimean Tatars after the deoccupation of the Crimea. In the process of this study, we identified two key recipes of mechanisms that can be employed to this end. First of all, it's all about no discrimination, so there should be no discrimination at individual level. Secondary, there has to be acknowledged of the fact that they exist. So basically, we need to grant them the right to feel part and parcel of a specific community. And it's a transversal right. So the Crimean Tatars should not be discriminated and acknowledged. The same holds true of combat veterans. All other things can be attended to at individual level. If we approach regional policy from this perspective, then we will see that our regions vary. There are specific traditions and customs in different regions. There are established practices depending on where you are. And this is something that we should not be afraid of. This is something that, conversely, we should foster and nurture. The more complex, heterogeneous, and diverse is our system, the system that we call Ukraine, the more sustainable, resilient, and steady the system will be in the face of external challenges. And this is something that was demonstrated by the full-scale invasion that broke out last year, and we can still observe it. Because we had autonomous and independent local communities with quite a lot of powers and authorities. Because our local communities were actively engaged, they were able to respond swiftly without waiting for the orders from the top, which was the opposite back in 2014, because back then, no one on the ground was ready to assume responsibility. To finish up my initial remarks, I would like to note that it's important to allow for heterogeneity. It's important to acknowledge otherness. This is our power, this is our strength. There's a limited list of things that require nationwide consensus, and there's a limited list of things that are only within the remit of the government and that requires a very specific policy on the part of the government.
Yes, please. Мікрофон, дівчата. Зараз добіжить до.
The question is, recently, I personally, and I think many people saw the surge in the discussion about the Crimean Tatar national territorial autonomy. This happened for the first time in November when Rifat Shubarov talked about this in public. And from time to time, this surges again and again. Frankly speaking, I'm rather surprised at how unwelcoming part of the reaction is. In these circumstances, especially knowing how many Crimean Tatars are in the Ukrainian armed forces, how strong the resistance is in the Crimea, both active and passive. Why do you think we meet with such an misunderstanding, that's my opinion, misunderstanding of the aims and goals.
Thank you for this question. Well, the short answer is it is about mistrust. Fundamentally, the society at large still doubts that the Crimean Tatars are about Ukraine. They still operate within the mindset that has been installed to them by Russia in the books on history, through TV. Up until 2014, the whole propaganda was portraying the Crimean Tatars as those who would like to, for example, join Turkey. And when you ask any single Crimean Tatar, would you like to join Turkey? When somebody asks me something like that, I say, you know what? I see a very brilliant case of Ukrainians once thinking that it's a good idea to join somebody back in 1654, when they thought that it was a good idea to join the Muscovites, and now we are seeing the consequences. Why do you think the Crimean Tatars would love to join Turkey? Why on earth? We don't speak their language, they don't speak ours. They have their culture, we have ours. They have their history, we have ours. So the Ukrainians still believe that we might be willing to join Turkey, first. Second, they think that, okay, if they get an autonomy, that would probably pave their way towards a sovereign state, okay? And this is a mindset of 19th century, when the philosophers of those times said, oh, you know what? Every single ethnic community dreams about getting its own sovereign state. The thing is, that is not the case. Why so? Because there are over 1,000 cultures worldwide who speak different languages, and only roughly 200 states that are recognized by the UN. So what about the rest 800? Do we really think that they are all in separatist movements within their countries? That is just not factually true. That is factually wrong. So the thing is that if you are recognized and if you are not discriminated, you are perfectly fine to live within this statehood that you do not dominate ethnically. And the Crimean Tatars, since 2014 up until today, we've seen a great progress that the Ukrainian state and the society has been going through in terms of recognition of the Crimean Tatars, as well as in terms of not discriminating them for who they are. So we have quite a few Crimean Tatars who are pretty high-ranking officials within the government. So we understand that there is no discrimination. So why on earth would we then, having all these advantages, we would then opt for fighting for a sovereign state in a place where we are a numerical minority, having, breaking ties with pretty much everybody, and probably sticking ourselves back to the past, whereas Ukraine is about to join the EU, NATO, the civilized world. I would love to see my nation being a part of this story, and it's a brilliant story, it's a beautiful story. Ukraine is a beautiful country with beautiful people, not just in terms of their physical appearance, but in terms of how they treat others. This is a stark, contrast from what we see in Russia. When they hate each other, they can't stand each other. They are ready to stab in their backs as soon as they can do it, okay? We here, we should learn to trust each other. We, I mean Ukrainians and the Crimean Tatars, we have all the prerequisites for that. So when we're talking about an autonomy, that's for us, for the Crimean Tatars, it's a matter of recognition. We understand that if there is an autonomy in Crimea, it means that we are recognized, full stop. Then we turn the page, the next page says, the beautiful future of Ukraine, and we're building it together.
Thank you. Thank you. So we touched an issue of trust, and I think that trust is very connected with justice, because in unjust society, it's very hard to build different kinds of trust. So I give the word to Svitlana Khilyuk, Dean of the School of Law of the Ukrainian Catholic University, to talk about justice.
Дякую за таку можливість і дякую за
Thank you.
представлення.
Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you for the introduction. I would like to revert to the metaphor that you started this panel discussion with, which is the health of the society. As a lawyer, I might give it a try and assess the state of our society from a legal perspective, but there's good news and bad news here. I will start with the bad news. In this part of the society, we have some ill people, but the good news is that we are not at the terminal stage yet. If we're talking about societal diseases pertaining to justice and the sense of fairness, I think that there's a tendency that is very similar to what we call schizophrenia in medicine. On the one hand, we have part of the society that has an acute sense of dignity. They are ready to die for it without a vestige of doubt. Just remember the Maidan, when a girl was rushing to administer first aid to those who were dying under the bullets of the snipers, and she knew that she had slim chances of surviving. It's a testimony to the fact that we have this sense of dignity in our society. The same can be said about those that volunteers to serve in the East, the leaders of the volunteer movements, people who came to power and are instilling a completely different culture, people reforming their sectors without looking back and without thinking about the price that they might have to pay, because it's all about personal comfort, it's all about the damage that might sustain. On the flip side of things, there are other situations. Ukraine is a catalog of all possible legal deformations. Whatever you take, it's present here. You can be raped in a police station, law enforcement shoot the demonstrators in the central part of the capital, in front of international cameras. The sentence is not there, so I cannot really state that it's a fact, but we are a unique country where the head of the Supreme Court, the reformed Supreme Court, is charged or alleged to have received unlawful advantage. So basically, he was paid a bribe to take a specific decision. My point here is that we have some bipolar or extreme things happening in our country that is not suggestive of the healthy state of our society. The immune system, if it responds to pathogens and diseases, it's a sign of hope. So in our case, we can see the immune system responding, which instills hope in all of us. And the key message here is that the patient wants to live. And we all know that when the patient wants to live, it's half the job done. We just need to exhibit an adequate response to that. Considering the current reality, what can this adequate or appropriate response be? What can it be? What can it look like? I believe that the adequate response is to call a spade. We need to call things for what they are. Another piece of the adequate response is not to think that things will change or become better. on their
Лікарі
own.
підтвердять, що якщо вже проблема в організмі є,
Doctors
з нею треба
might
щось
confirm
робити,
that if
інакше вона
there's a
цей бідний
problem
організм доконає.
in a human body,
Коли
you
ми
need to do
говоримо, знову ж
something
таки, про
about it,
правову
otherwise it will
сферу
kill the
і про
body.
сферу справедливості,
When we're talking about
в
the
Європейський
legal
суд
domain
сформулював
and
свої
the justice
стандарти,
sector, the
і він
European
каже, що
Court
важливо не просто,
formulated
щоб
their own
правосуддя
standards. And under these
здійснювалося,
standards,
важливо, щоб було видно,
it's essential
що
not only
здійснюється
to do
правосуддя, для
justice,
того, щоб
we need
суспільство
to
могло
make this
довіряти
justice
тому, що
visible
відбувається.
so that the society
І
will
якщо
have trust
повертатися
in
до
what is
нашого там
happening.
загострення тижневої давності,
Back to the
то на сьогоднішній день ні для кого
situation
не є
of
секретом,
one
що
week
що би вже не
ago.
відбувалося в
It's
цій
not a
інстанції,
secret
суспільство не віритиме.
for anyone that whatever happens
А отже,
in
будь-які
this
методи з
institution,
переставлянням
the
фігур,
society
вони
will
для
not have
суспільства
trust. I
не
mean,
спрацюють.
you might appoint a
Тим
different
більше,
head of the
коли,
Supreme Court, you might
ново
rotate and swap
представлені
people,
фігури, і
but
знову
this
ж таки
trick
це
will not
кажуть
really
засоби
do
масової
the job for the
інформації,
society.
в якості ключового
So
аргументу
we have
використовують
these
можливість отримання
new
квартир
actors in
людьми,
place,
які отримують чверть мільйона щомісяця.
and sometimes
Тому,
these mechanisms are used just to get an
є
apartment,
запит на,
even though the salaries of these
на
people
правосуддя.
constitute
І
one
є
quarter of a
здорова
million.
частина
So there is
суспільства, яка
a
розуміє,
demand
де
for
межа,
justice,
що
and
добре,
we
а
have
що
the
зле,
healthy
що
part of our
справедливо, що не
society
дуже.
that understands where to draw
Є
a line in the
проблеми,
sand, what is
які
healthy,
треба
what is not, what is good,
визнавати.
what is not. There are also problems that we need
І
to
треба
acknowledge.
якось на це адекватно реагувати.
And we
Визнавши
need
проблему і
to
підібравши
demonstrate an
адекватний
adequate
спосіб
response. So we need to
лікування.
acknowledge this problem, and
З
we
цим не
need
треба
to
затягувати, бо
select
чим далі
the
краще не
right
буде, буде гірше.
treatment approach. But we should
Але
not
знову ж
really
таки,
put
зі
this
свого,
issue on the
як на
back
мене,
burner. We should not delay
де ми
it.
можемо шукати ті джерела,
The
і ті
longer
сили
we
для
wait,
того, щоб
the
хворобу
worse
виправити.
it will
І
get.
Арсен вже про це
But we also
згадував.
need to
Це
understand
є
where
гідність.
to get that strength and
Вона є в
resourcefulness
основі
to
всього.
fix all these
Знову
problems.
ж таки,
This is something that
повертаючись
Arsen
до
alluded to. It's all
наболілого,
about dignity. This is the centerpiece for
зарплата
everything.
судді Верховного суду
Back to
України
the
в 4 рази
nettlesome
вища, ніж судді
issues.
Верховного суду Литви.
If we have a look at the salaries of the head of the Supreme Court, it's fourfold of the same salaries in Latvia or Israel, for example. So my point is that if we increase salaries, that will not be an adequate remedy. If we prosecute specific people that were caught red-handed,
це необхідна міра, але знову ж таки не є
this is
достатня.
a required
Коли ми говоримо про
or
гідність,
necessary
то гідність
measure, but it will not
це те,
suffice
з чим
either.
ми
When
народжуємося,
we're talking about dignity,
але і це те,
this is something
що
that
ми
we are born
формуємо
with,
і
but at
виховуємо
the
в
same
собі
time,
впродовж
this is
життя.
something that we
Гідність
shape
це не лише,
and cultivate in
вимагати
ourselves
певного
throughout our
ставлення до
life.
себе,
Dignity is not only
але
about
гідність
demanding a
це
specific
поводитися в
attitude
певний
towards yourself.
спосіб.
Dignity is also
Тому
about
про
behaving
гідність
or
важко
comporting
говорити,
yourself
коли
in a
ти
specific
мовчки
way.
підтримуєш ганебні
It's difficult
речі,
to talk about dignity
тихенько
when you
втішаючись, що я
silently
так не
nurture
роблю. Мені здається, з
disgraceful
гідністю це
things
має
and you just indulge yourself
так
in
багато
thinking
спільного.
that you are
Критичні
not directly
ситуації,
involved
для того,
yourself.
щоб ми могли говорити
In a
про
critical
здоров'я
situation,
суспільного
if we want
організму,
to claim
який,
that we have a
перебуває в
healthy
важкій фазі хвороби,
society
гідність і свобода вимагає активної
experiencing a
позиції.
severe disease, we need to have an active stance about freedom
Тихо
and
стояти
dignity.
осторонь,
We
коли поруч
cannot
з тобою
silently stand on the
відбуваються
sidelines
ганебні
when you can witness
надіючись, що,
ugly
оскільки
and
він не взяв
disgraceful
безпосередньої
things
участі, ти врятував
happening
свою
in front of
гідність.
your eyes. So do
Мабуть,
not
не найоптимальніший
find
засіб.
solace in the
засіб
fact
лікування.
that
І якщо,
you are not
з моєї,
implicated because
промови
you
ви
did not
мали
contribute
запам'ятати
directly.
там 3 речі, то цими 3
There are
речами
3
я
things
би
that I would
хотіла,
like you to
щоб було
remember
те,
from my
що,
initial speech.
наше суспільне тіло, коли
Our
ми говоримо,
societal
потребує справедливості
body
для того, щоб вижити.
requires justice
За
to
неї
survive,
варто
and this
боротися.
is something
У
worth
нас
fighting
є
for.
ресурс, який
We have
можна
resources
використати для цієї
that can be
боротьби.
utilized
І ключова річ
as
не
part of
здаватися.
this
Якщо не
struggle
вийшло
or
з
fight,
першого
and
разу,
the
треба
key thing is
спробувати
never
ще
give up.
наступних 45,
If you
може, з
fail
53-го нам
after the
вдасться.
first attempt, you
Дякую.
need to try 45 more times, and maybe after the 50th one, you will succeed.
Yes, thank you, Svitlana, for the reminder that our collective body's health is affected not only by war, but by others things too, and we need to address all of them. Maybe someone has a question for Svitlana?
Так, мене чути. Я
Can you hear
перепрошую,
me?
що збиваю порядок, але в мене є питання до Арсена, яке
I
я
have
хотіла
a
задати
question
ще
to
в
Arsene,
минулому-
and
в
I
минулій частині.
apologize for
Воно буде
breaking the
не дуже
sequence
довгим.
of
Воно буде продовженням
speakers.
іншого питання,
This
яке
is
вам
a question that
задавали.
I wanted to ask during the previous
Як на
panel
мене,
discussion. It's a brief
я
one.
зараз досліджую тему кримських татар
I
як
am
народу і
exploring
трошки
the
пишу про це.
topic of the Crimean Tatars as a nation, as a
Відсутність
people,
дискримінації і
and
звідки
I
взагалі
write some
виникає
texts about
дискримінація, як
that.
на мене, виникає з того, що
I believe
нерозуміння – це незнання.
that
Незнання
we have
про
discrimination
кримських татар
because lack of
нічого.
understanding
Насправді, з
is
молодшим
related
поколінням
to
трошки зрозуміло, що з
ignorance.
цим треба робити.
We don't really know that much
Треба
about the
додавати
Crimean Tatars.
кримських
As for the
письменників,
younger
поетів,
generation,
нашу
we know what to do.
літературу,
We need to
дитячу.
incorporate
Але
the
що
Crimean
робити з
Tatar
молоддю,
poets
яка
and writers
нічого не
into
знає
our children's
про
literature.
цей
But
народ?
what about
І як
youth?
саме
I mean, young
треба
people don't know
залучати їх до
anything
цих знань?
about this
Тому
nation.
що для
How
мене
do we
досить
instill
важко
this knowledge and
писати
understanding in them?
про той народ,
It's a
який
formidable
я не
task for
вчила зі
me
школи,
to
про
write about
ту
the people
історію, яку я не
that
знала,
I didn't
про
study
той
back in
голод,
school. I
про
didn't really know
ті
anything about them. I didn't
репресії,
really know about
які
the
я
starvation and
не вчила,
reprisals
і,
that they were
мені
subjected to.
нічого
This
про
is
це не
something that
відомо
was not
змалечку, але я дуже хочу це досліджувати. Тому моє
offered
питання
as part of
таке,
our
як
education
молоді,
system, but I'm ready
більше
to explore
дізнаватись про це,
and find
як
out more. So
поширювати
my question
і
is as follows.
якось
What can we
вилучати цю
do
дискримінацію?
to encourage young
Дякую.
people learn more about this nation and this way exterminate any potential discrimination? Thank you very much for your question. There are two pieces of the answer here. We can pass the buck to the government, and we can say that the Ministry of Education and Science has to review all the textbooks. The Ministry of Culture needs to incorporate some Crimean Tatar movies into their lineup. All these things are essential, but I would like to draw your attention to the societal aspect of things. What can we do as a society? First and foremost, we can start exhibiting a sincere and avid interest in the Crimean Tatars. And this is exactly what I can see in you on your face. I mean, you got interested in our experience, and this is something that you started exploring. This is the right pathway to follow, and it's fundamental. It's necessary. So we need to explore the experience. We need to give it a try and empathize with the history and experience of the Crimean Tatars. And once you do that, it will become your second nature to view the Crimean Tatars as your own people, as dear ones. You will not really have to put in effort not to discriminate against the Crimean Tatars. So you will not discriminate, not because there will be some sanctions imposed on you if you say something wrong about the interpretation. So you will not discriminate, not out of fear. On a fundamental and visceral level, you will have a positive and friendly attitude towards this nation. By the way, there are some other Crimean Tatars present here. So like there's one Crimean Tatar lady who's been living in Lviv for quite a while. We had some talks in the back rooms and we shared our experience. For us, the Crimean Tatars, the Ukrainians are easy to understand because this is something that we studied in school. And then when we moved to the continental part of Ukraine, we explored the experience of the Ukrainians. We heard and read about the Great Famine, Holodomor, the Western Ukrainian Republic, the Ukrainian People's Republic. We were exposed to some of the important historic figures in the history of Ukraine. And then we were direct participants to the Orange Revolution and the Revolution of Dignity. But briefly, back to your question. So what can we do to exterminate the negative implications of this mistrust or distrust? We need to have an avid interest and we need to start exploring. So we need to embark on that exploratory journey, and that will be a fertile ground for mutual trust. Thank you.
I propose now to take some time for all of us, for you in the audience and for our speakers, and for me too, to reflect on one of the questions I was asking at the beginning. Yes, how can we determine that we became a healthy society and a free society, how do we know? What would be the symptoms of our health, if I could say so?
I don't know. I almost feel like I have to start to answer. There are no indicators. There are no blood measurement or other or blood pressure measurement that you can say that as easy as in a clinic that the patient is healthy or survived at least. My initial thought was that the way we are getting prepared, getting trained, and as a society, as communities on the national level, to receive back not only the territories, but people who live there, and integrate back veterans, how we are doing our homework today in terms of preparing the society to integrate them, not by providing some pensions or ability to pass rehabilitation course and get prosthesis services, but to, as Arsen said, to accept them, and so that they feel that they are treated with dignity, that they are an integral part of the society. And yes, indeed, it may be their choice, and we in Health Solutions are about choices for dignity. There might be a choice for a veteran or for a person who lived for 10 years in occupation to say, you know, I need time off. I need to be a part of the society, be included, but I don't want to take active part. I don't want to rebuild this hospital or this administrative building. I don't want to take part in self-governance, but I want to be present, I want to be heard, and I want to be part. At the same time, we as a community must be prepared that some of them will rise again and stay strong and say, yes, despite my amputation, despite my 10 years kick back and oppression and totalitarianism and fear that I lived in, I want to make that existential leap and move forward. And I want to stay by you in rebuilding the hospital, in rebuilding the new society where I want to live. So we in Health Solutions are already thinking about the strategy, what to do after the deoccupation. And it's not the strategy about how we rebuild the hospital or how we are integrating the patients and expanding or reinstalling Ukrainian system. It's about how we do our homework today and train ourselves to be more tolerant, not in a way that because it's written in the law, as Arsen said, but because we understand, we feel it from inside, not only because it's written in the rules that we must obey. And I think for each of us, it's the matter of choice, but this choice has to be provided. There has to be means and instruments to realize that choice and be an integral part of the society.
Thank you very much. Share your thoughts, please. Yes, I see a hand there. Mm-hmm. Yes, you're next. Okay.
Thank you. So, я буду, напевно, українською. Мене звати
I
Софія
will be
Кучмар-Тимошенко.
speaking Ukrainian. My name is Sofia.
Деокупації Бучі провела там
After the
4 місяці,
deoccupation of
працюючи
Bucha, I
з
spent
воєнними
4
злочинами.
months there
Оскільки ми дуже часто тут зараз говоримо про
exploring war crimes.
правоохоронні органи і про
I have a
те,
question.
як ветерани повертатимуться
We've been
в наше
talking
суспільство. Я
about
хотіла
law
би
enforcement
звернути увагу
justice
на те,
and
що
how
не
to
лише
reintegrate combat
ветерани
veterans
Збройних Сил будуть
in society,
повертатися,
but I would like to
але
draw your
теж
attention
люди
to the fact that it's not only about the combat
якщо
veterans of
фізичні
Ukraine's
травми,
armed forces,
то дуже
but also
ментальні
law enforcement officers in staff that experienced, if not physical, then mental trauma. There's a lot of mistrust in the society right now. I observed it in Bucha because people were ready to report some details of war crimes to me, but not to our law enforcement, even though those were law enforcement with the blue and yellow flags. So my question is, who should be responsible for reintegrating these people? It's not only about exterminating the evil ones. How are we going to restore and recover their health? Because if we do not do that, then it will all turn into immense aggression that they will take out on all of us. I'm not really sure who to address this question to. We need to be ready not only to reform our law enforcement, but we also need to be ready to take good care of some of these people. I will try to answer this question. Thank you for it. Yesterday, we had a panel discussion or a conversation about the return and reintegration of combat veterans. And different exclusive models were put on the table. Like, for example, we will have assistance for combat veterans, or we will have assistance for people with disabilities or people who became disabled as a result of the war. Well, to be honest, I don't really commend this idea because it's not really about separate services for specific populations. I mean, if we want to have this free society that has a place for everyone, if we are talking about a choice of self-actualization, we need to build a comprehensive model that will be able to cater for the needs and interests of different people, regardless of their status, regardless of whether they represent law enforcement, territorial defense force, Ukraine's armed forces, or any other walk of life. So first and foremost, there has to be a generic comprehensive strategy. These approaches have to be well structured and uniform. There's another point that I would like to make. It might be just my attitude, but when we say that the government has to take care, I always ask myself, what does that mean? I mean, what is the embodiment of the state of the government that should be the caring one, that should take care? And then I think, okay, I am a combat veteran, I go back home, and then what? A social worker comes to me, or maybe I go to a family doctor and receive a referral from this family doctor. My point here is that as a society, we should be ready to accept and perform specific functions. We should not just pass the buck to the government, and we should not just point our fingers at the government and say, well, the government deployed them there or gave them this mission or task, and let the government take care of them. Each and every one of us should assume our chunk of responsibility. So it's all about homework. We need to brace ourselves. We need to glean as much information about how we can naturally reintegrate these people. But for this, we need to at least try and understand the experience that they underwent.
First.
The question is first addressed to Arsen, but I would like the other panelists to answer in their respective spheres. We are now revising the history of relations between Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars. I remember very well the times when Crimean Tatars were the biggest enemies of the Ukrainian people, presumably in the 16th, 17th, and part of the 18th century. But now we concentrate on positive features within our relations, how to avoid the danger of embellishing everything that might be and was disputable in our history. And the other panelists, please, where do you see such a danger in your respective spheres? All right? Thank you.
So, what can we do to shed light on not just the negative aspects of our shared history, but also the positive ones? So first of all, we should formulate them. And for myself, what I take as the most important, common feature of the Ukrainians and the Crimean Tatars is our openness, because we both are a part of of Mediterranean civilization, so-called. Yes, there is an approach which sees all countries that have, throughout the whole history, have been trading with each other, have been communicating with each other. They see all these cultures as those who share values of openness, of being ready for a dialogue, unlike those cultures who used to be closed always, very high in mountains or very deep in forestry, whatever. So the Ukrainians and the Crimean Tatars, we used to trade a lot. We used to communicate a lot. And these are shared, pages of our history that we don't actually mention a lot, which is pity. Why? Because that's actually the common ground. Those who actually know Crimean Tatars, they know that the Crimean Tatars are very open. They are ready to talk. They're ready to share their stories.
And this follows from your gesticulations as well.
Yes, it's like, some say that the way we do the gestures is like Italians do, but that's not because of the roots, but more because of the culture that we all share. It is very much open, okay? So that's very important. We should talk about some things that are common for us, and I believe that the Ukrainians, they also share it. The Ukrainians are, fundamentally open. They are fundamentally tolerant. They are ready to accept. This is important. And I see there is Pasha Kazarin at the back bench. Yes, hi Pasha. And he will probably say that, like, whatever I say, it's not just my illusion, that's the truth. We in Crimea, the younger generation who were not infiltrated with the Russian propaganda, we were communicating with each other a lot. And that's a very firm ground for our common future, I believe.
There is one sentence that I wanted to add to what Arsen said, is that not only we need to look back in the history and recollect positive memories in the history, but we also need to start creating new history as we live and create these relationships now. Without any exaggeration, I'm really looking forward for my kids to play with Arsen kids and see them mingle in the playground and at school and exchange, learn to dance and learn to speak some words. Because this is, I think, how history is made, and how without the necessary rules and strict top-down teaching, you create that friendship, the memories, and the understanding. And that's what I'm really praying for.
Я б хотіла повернутися, знову ж таки, звучало питання про те, як ми будемо
how we are going to
реінтегровувати
reintegrate people who will return to Ukraine. And I'm talking about the veterans, the law enforcement officials and representatives of all the institutions. And you have stated that actually the war crimes in Bucha will be reported to anybody but to the law enforcement authorities. And this is one of the societal diseases, lack of trust, because the state is considered to be something evil. The state came, took lives, took belongings, sent you to Siberia. Later you could be deprived of your rights, you could be deprived of your business without any grounds. So this distrust is there, and we have to overcome it. How we can do it? Two extreme poles should go towards each other. One, the state institutions will be changed, as well as their rules and procedures. And also when the active part of the society will be ready to become part of the authorities in order to change something and in order to serve. Now, there are lots of initiatives that are proud of the fact that do not have any single hryvnia of state funding in their
Це
budgets.
робить їм честь,
And
тобто
this
бути
is really
незалежним
good.
від держави
To
це
be
позитивна
independent of the
характеристика.
state is a
Це означає, що
positive
з державою
feature.
щось не так.
It
І ці
means
речі треба
that probably
долати.
something
І
is
коли
wrong with the state, and it doesn't mean that it
інакшого
is
шляху, ніж
really
просто
that positive.
щоденна системна
So
праця
there is no
немає.
other
Тут
way
один чоловік
but
сказав мені,
everyday
проблема з
systemic
хабарництвом
work.
вирішується просто.
Once somebody
Ви не
told
беріть і
me
не
bribery
давайте.
is settled very easily.
в
Do
реалії
not
воно
take
виглядає
bribes and do
трошки
not give
інакше.
bribes.
І
In
коли
real
ми
life,
говоримо
it
про
looks slightly different.
повернення
So when we are
реінтеграцію
talking
людей,
about
які повернуться з
reintegration
війни
of
або
our
які зазнали
veterans
насильства,
or reintegration of
знову ж
people
таки тут
who
допоміжна
have been
річ є
affected by
гідність,
violence,
а
there
гідність
is
це
another
означає, що ми
important
людину
thing,
не
which is
трактуємо як
dignity.
об'єкт.
And that means that we do not
Відповідно, є
consider a
речі,
person to
які
be an
мають
object.
бути
There are certain
забезпечені
things that
ветеранам
we
в
should
тому
provide
числі,
the veterans with.
але ми не повинні дозволяти
But
собі
we
весь
should
час
not
говорити про них в пасивному
talk about them
стані. Їм має бути
in
дано,
passive
їм
voice.
має
They
бути
should be
забезпечено
given, they
і так
should
далі.
be provided,
Їхній голос
etc.
має бути
Their
почутий.
voice should be
Вони повинні
heard.
брати участь у
They should be
відбудові
active
країни.
participants in
Вони
rebuilding of the
мають
country.
мати можливість
They should have the opportunity
комунікувати свій
to
досвід, і
communicate
вони мають
and share their
вони
experience
знову
and
ж
talk
таки
about
мають
their
право брати
experience.
участь у створенні
They
умов,
have
щоб цей
the
досвід
right
долався
to
і
create
враховувався.
conditions
Але з іншого
for
боку,
this
з іншого
experience
боку,
to be
цей
addressed.
досвід не може
And
стати
on the other
універсальним
hand,
виправданням
this
для
experience
того,
should not be a universal justification
трактувати їх як об'єкт. Що мається на
to
увазі?
interpret them as an
У
object.
16-му році, мені
What
здається,
I
це була
mean,
відома справа в
in
Київській області,
2016, there was
коли
a
один з колишніх
famous
учасників
case in
АТО
Kyiv region
зґвалтував
when one of the
неповнолітню.
participants of
Потерпілій особі
anti-terroristic
було
operation
16
raped a
років,
minor.
його звільнили
A
від
girl
відбування
was 16
покарання,
years old,
пом'якшуючи
and
обставину і визнали
he
факт
was
участі в
acquitted, and the mitigating circumstances was participation in the anti-terroristic operation. In this situation, it is also a
Є
problem
певні вимоги,
when
які
there are
мають бути
certain
дотримані,
requirements
і повага до
that should be
гідності
kept,
означає, що людина
and
несе
the
відповідальність.
respect
Тобто тут
to
має
human
бути
dignity
абсолютно
means that
системний
people
підхід для
take on
того, щоб
responsibility. There should be a
мільйон людей,
systemic
які
approach
рятують і закривають нас
when
своїм
the
життям,
millions of
вони
people who
повернулися
save
назад в
us
суспільство не в
come
якості
back to
об'єкта
society
опіки,
not
а в
as
якості
an object
повноцінних
that is
членів
taken care of,
суспільства, які
but a
заслуговують на
full-fledged
повагу,
member of the
підтримку,
society that
але які все ще
deserve
зберігають здатність нести
the
відповідальність.
support and respect,
За
but
себе в
still
першу чергу і за те, що
take
відбувається біля
on
них.
responsibility for themselves and
We
for
have a
their
question
environment.
over there. Yeah, yes, please. Give the mic, please.
Так, так.
Okay, you have. Okay.
Якщо можна, я українською, мене звати
так.
Анастасія.
I will speak Ukrainian. My name is Anastasia. We are talking about building our healthy society, tolerance in the population, importance of integration of the war veterans, as well as integration of civilians who were under occupation. So the question is like that.
Щойно згадали, зачепили цю тему.
We have just touched upon this topic. Tolerance is good, but tolerance can lead to crossing the red lines when a healthy society is transformed into an ill society. So how we should approach this? Because tolerance is important, but we should avoid the situation when tolerance goes beyond certain limits. And what are the limits? Could you please clarify?
Аби це не було апріорі прийняття навіть якихось
So when we do not a priori accept or tolerate some illegal actions,
або що це може контролювати.
so taking on responsibility, who is going to control it? The very societies, the authorities, or tolerance is a very good issue. So what we see sometimes in the West, for example, what happened in the US, the swing back, the sort of a reversal movement. So we have played the issue of tolerance, and now we have to bring back the white majority, the point that you are right. So it's enough to play this tolerance game towards the Afro-Americans and LGBTIQ groups, so we have the right to live the way we want. This trend is important, and what kind of lessons can we take from it? The first and the most important thing, or probably just the first thing, we have to differentiate that tolerance is based on non-discrimination, that we are talking about non-discrimination, but not that we create privileges for some groups, for example, whether we are talking about the Crimean Tatars or the war veterans or any other group. So, non-discrimination and recognition. I have not been talking about the privileges that I mean whatever the groups are. So the Crimean Tatars, the war veterans, the representatives of the law enforcement authorities or any other groups should be given something. So I should not state that they should be given land plots, houses, any other things. There should be non-discrimination. There should not be collective privileges, because when collective privileges are there, then the group which does not fall or is not covered by the privilege has this discontent. And this discontent, sooner or later, will be transformed into anti-establishment movement, something we see in the West. So the first point, when we are talking about tolerance, we are talking about non-discrimination. We are not talking about tolerating the privileges. The second point, when we talk about tolerance, we are talking about recognition, and that is what Svitlana was talking about. In India, the lowest caste is called untouchable, untouched, and they are called like this because nobody wants to deal with them. They are not seen, they are not visible, so they do something and actually nobody wants to do business with them. So when a person is not seen and is not heard, this is the biggest blow on his or her dignity. And in many cases, when we are talking about a certain group, and we understand that, for example, this group has different experience. For example, the war veterans have now different experience. We should not pour them with privileges and many other things. So probably the first thing we should do is to talk to a person, to see a person, to hear a person. When I communicate to people from the front lines, they do not need any special privileges. They want to be heard and they want to be seen. Tolerance is an important concept, but it's important to include into this concept something that will later result in some undesirable response in some distant future. I would probably give you a specifying question, and also in Ukrainian. You say non-discrimination is enough, but if a certain group has been discriminated against for a long time, it cannot function in a full-fledged way only by being given their rights. For example, a certain group didn't have access to employment or education. I think that in the Crimean Tatar history there is this point. Well, really, the Crimean Tatar people had this period in their history. There are two approaches here. The first one, we accept the formal equality as in something that is enough. And the second approach is that the formal equality of rights and opportunities is not enough. We
we have to ensure the real equality. And to do this, we have to analyze the experience of this or that group. The second concept is very attractive. However, it has its own disadvantages, because sooner or later there will be groups which, from the historical point of view, historical events, which was not their fault, had the experience which was unique for them and is not peculiar for the other groups. And this group may say, our historical experience means that we need some additional privileges in order to have equal opportunities in comparison with the other groups. As a Crimean Tatar, I can easily make this statement. We were deported, we didn't live on our motherland, we were deprived of our property, and we had to come back. So we didn't have these privileges. And now we say, let's try and build a future where what we want is non-discrimination and recognition. We do not state, give us the land plots, the resources, the forests, all the other things. So studying this issue, and I study this issue because it's really a topical issue, I would certainly make a priority of making people equal in individual way. For example, there is a war veteran who was dismissed from his work, and he was just lagging behind in his professional development for 2 years. So let's train him, let's assist him or her to find a job. And for example, we have a veteran who missed the education opportunities. Okay, let's think what we can do for him. Because if we take a formal approach to all these people, probably there will be a dangerous situation at a certain stage. Thank you for the answer. I started the topic of veterans from the previous panel. Non-discrimination, I support Arsen here because we are talking about this activity all the time. But if we raise the topic of non-discrimination, we see the year 2017-18, equal opportunities, but at the same time, we heard, well, nobody sent you to the front line, etc. And there was the highest suicide rate. And the veterans who come back, who with full-scale invasion, once again go to the front line. There are 70 or 80% of them. So what should we do now? People are now in the front line. They will come back, and will we hear again, we didn't send you to the front line? So I think we have to think a bit ahead. Lots of people are already coming back because they were severely injured. They have some serious psychological traumas. So in case we do not address this issue now, we shall have the same story 5 years later, 5 years after our victory. I think that with the number of war veterans now, we won't be able to give privileges to all of them. We really have to create opportunities for them, to reintegrate them. They are civilians with military experience. And if we do it, we won't have the news, anti-terrorist operation participant was involved in that crime. So these were civilians, these people are civilians with military experience, so we have to help them.
I've got a question. It's changing the subject a little bit, but I think it's come up a couple of times today already, the lack of confidence in Ukraine's justice system and the clear need for deep reform of that justice system. At the moment, there are hundreds, actually probably thousands of Ukrainian citizens who are being prosecuted for crimes related to collaboration with the Russian invaders. What do you think are the risks for the coherence of society if there are major miscarriages of justice in these processes, or even if there are just a perception that these people have been prosecuted unfairly, and also the fact that they're likely to drag on for months, if not years, before people are pronounced guilty or not guilty?
Thank you very much for this question.
Дякую за це запитання. Насправді це одна з точок болю, про яку треба говорити.
Thank you for this question. This is one of the painful topics which should be addressed here and now. I'll deviate a bit, and I would say that we have, again, some negative things in our judicial system. For example, we have a special presidential commission on the judicial reform, and it has a number of working groups, and there was a document number 1 which was prepared, and that was the draft criminal code. The group working on constitution didn't produce anything so far, but the criminal code has already been produced. And from the viewpoint of our historical experience, it's clear. First of all, we produced the criminal code and then everything else. But once again, this is not the sign of a healthy society. Probably we should have started from something different. As we are talking about new societal agreement, probably we should speak about new constitution, the values people are fighting for, dignity and freedom, and only later we should address the criminal issues. Providing answers to your question, talking about criminal liability for collaboration and other manifestations of dangerous behavior. So what should be prosecuted and what should not be prosecuted in a criminal way? We can discuss these questions only after the country understands and has the strategy of full reintegration of the occupied territories. First of all, we have to elaborate the strategic vision, what we want and what we want to do, and then we can address already the other issues. One of them is bringing people to justice. Whether cooperation with the invasion authorities can be recognized as criminally liable collaboration? Probably not, in my opinion, because people were not occupied on their own will. They were occupied because the state failed to ensure safety and security. And the burdens of some negative consequences of it cannot be put on the occupied population. Yes, there are certain collaboration activities. When, for example, a judge in the occupied territory becomes a judge within the occupying power, this collaboration format is traditionally treated as state treason and definitely is criminally liable. Should the teacher of mathematics be criminally liable who continued teaching 2 + 2 is 4, but again, formally, it is done on the basis of some other curricula? So here I'm not sure that we have some legal grounds for this criminal liability. But once again, this is a partial issue that should be addressed after the decision is made on the strategy of reintegration of the occupied territories. And the strategy should be different for the territories that have been under occupation for 10 years and for those territories that have been occupied for a bit more than 1 year. And again, the criminal issues cannot be locomotive in this discussion. They may be the consequence, they can be the means, but they cannot be the primary thing.
As far as I know, been defined, but already cases are underway. People are in detention in Kharkiv region in practice the cases are going forward without this strategy you speak of having been established and defined as far as I understand it.
І це проблема.
And that's the problem.
Yes. Ivana, then...
Іванно, будь ласка.
Ні, да? Добре.
Дякую. Мене звуть Микола.
Thank you. My name is Mikola, and I would like to mention the issue of reintegration of veterans who will come back from war. It seems to me we tackle this issue from a different angle. We think how they should be integrated into society and how we actually make them accept our own system of values, because they have their system of values. I know what I'm talking about. I was in the war last year, and I communicate to people who come back. A person spent 3 days in Lviv, and he shared with me certain triggers. So he says he's disappointed because he sees that society has not changed. We are lagging behind. They started speaking Ukrainian, particularly those who were speaking Russian. They demonstrate higher tolerance and acceptance than our society. So when he came back, and he's, by the way, going back to the front line today, he's coming back saying that I'm disappointed with Lviv, with the society here, because there have not been major changes. So the best way is to accept their values and to grow, to rise to their level.
Someone there was holding a hand.
Дякую. Альона Нестеренко, Інститут масової
Альона
інформації.
Нестеренко, Mass
Не так,
Information
щоб
Institute.
точно до теми скажу, я просто
Probably
хочу
I'll not speak
відрефлексувати
to
з
the very
приводу
topic.
змін до
I'll
Кримінального
give
кодексу.
my reflections
Я просто не
on
зрозуміла
the
цього
changes to the
моменту
criminal
щодо
code.
важливості
I
цього,
have
тому
not
хочу
quite
наголосити.
understood the
Моя
importance of
організація
it.
зараз
My
готує
organization
презентацію
is
дослідження,
preparing
принагідно всіх
the presentation
запрошую
of
1
the
числа до Українського
research.
кризового
By the way, I
медіа-центру.
invite you
І
to the
ми
Ukrainian Crisis
зараз
Media Center on
готуємо
the 1st of
презентацію
June.
щодо того, як
So we prepare
Росія
the presentation
стирає
of the research, how
ідентичність українську через
Russia
сферу
is
освіти.
erasing
І
the
оскільки
Ukrainian
тут
identity
пролунала
through
теза щодо
education,
вчителів, мені б
and
хотілося
here
такий
there was the
важливий ще
statement about
момент
teachers.
підняти.
I would like to
Ми коли стали
issue the
досліджувати цю
following
тему,
point.
то
When
помітили
we
такий
started
момент,
researching this
що
topic, we
Росія впроваджує
noticed
цілу
that
низку
Russia
схем,
integrates
які ми
a
презентуємо
number of
незабаром,
patterns
для
of
того,
schemes
щоб,
that will be presented
зокрема, своїх
at the
вчителів
presentation in
інтегрувати
order to
на тимчасово
integrate
окупованих територіях
its own
України, і
teachers in the
туди
temporarily
приїжджають
occupied
абсолютно всі,
territories of
там і
Ukraine.
вчителі
And there are different
математики,
people
і фізкультурники, ну,
who are coming
тобто
here,
це все
the
під
teachers of
соусом, що
mathematics, the teachers of
українська
sport,
освіта дуже
etc.
погана,
And everything
і
is
приїжджають при цьому
explained by the
спеціалісти
fact
і
that
технічних
Ukrainian
спеціальностей,
education
знов-таки
is very
математики,
bad.
і
And once again, we have
фізкультурники, і
experts
тому що
in
суть не в тому, яка
mathematics,
освіта,
in
а суть в тому, як
sport.
стирати
The point
ідентичність. І
is
що
not
ми
about the
помітили,
quality
так
of
це те, що
education,
досі
but
у нас немає
about
чітко в
erasing
законодавстві
identity. And we have
прописаного
noticed
моменту
that in our
відповідальності
legislation we do not
для російських вчителів.
have
Вони
the
за тими нормами,
responsibility
які
and
у нас нині
liability
є
for
в
the Russian
Кримінальному
teachers,
кодексі,
because
можуть максимум
according to the
проходити
provisions
як
of our
співучасники
criminal
цього
code,
злочину.
they
І
will be the
кількість і ступінь покарання
participants, the
суттєво
accomplices
відрізняється.
of this
Тобто,
crime,
умовно,
and
колаборанти
the
нас зараз ще
degree of
якось
punishment
можна
will
їх
be
притягнути
different,
потім до
because
відповідальності.
those
Це
who are
велике питання, насправді,
collaborators
наскільки ці
actually
люди
may be
дійсно
brought
під
to
тиском, а
liability.
хто з них
The question is
чекав
really
приходу
whether
руського міру. Це
somebody
ціла
took the
низка так
position
само
under pressure, and
вчителів,
still
які
there
і
are
математики, і
people
не
who
математики,
were waiting
неважливо, ну
for the
тобто,
Russian
які
world.
з радістю
So there are
дають, не видно по
definitely
ним, що
people
це
who
був
are very
тиск,
happy to
інтерв'ю
accept new
російським
positions. These
інформаційним
people give
ресурсам.
the interviews
Тому я
to the
просто
Russian
хотіла б підняти цю
information
тему. Я розумію, що це не
sources.
зовсім до теми
I would
нашої
like to
дискусії,
raise
але
this topic.
зводити там
I
на нівець
understand it
моменти
deviates from our
важливості
discussion,
внесення певних
but
змін до кримінального законодавства, як на
we
мене,
cannot
це зараз
state
така,
that
це
there should
дуже
know
небезпечно,
that the
тому що
changes to the
навпаки,
criminal code
оцей закон про
are not
колабораціонізм, наскільки я
timely.
пам'ятаю, він
I
з'явився
think
вже
that the
під час
law on
повномасштабного вторгнення і
collaboration
певні зміни там
has
проходили.
been
А
passed
російських
during the
вчителів,
full-scale
які
invasion,
дійсно, це не
and
державна зрада в випадку там
the
українських вчителів, які перейшли на ту сторону. А ці
when we
російські
have
вчителі, вони
the Russian
приїжджають, і вони
teachers,
дійсно під
these Russian
соусом того, що ми діток
teachers
будемо вчити математиці
say that we
умовно,
are going to
впроваджують дуже
teach
небезпечні
children
тези, стирають
mathematics,
нашу
and at
ідентичність.
the same
А
time
ми,
they teach
виходить, що
children
поки
very
в цьому плані
dangerous
беззахисні,
issues
тому що,
and
наскільки я
erase
пам'ятаю,
their
тут
Ukrainian
теж
identity.
відповідно до
And we are
норм,
to some
взагалі
extent
до
helpless
юридичного права,
here,
ми не
because
можемо це
according to
відкатати
the
назад.
norms
Тобто
of
навіть
the
якщо зараз
law,
з'являється
we
закон,
cannot
ми вже
reverse it.
притягнути до
So if
відповідальності
the
тих
law
людей, які і зараз
appears only
перебувають на
now,
тимчасово
we
окупованих територіях,
cannot
ми не
bring
можемо.
people to
Дякую.
liability. Thank you.
Гаразд, дякую. Це цікава думка.
This is an important idea. The criminal law is something very dangerous. You have to use it cautiously and only when you really need it. In society, we have the increased punishment expectations. When people are naive to believe that the article in the criminal code will resolve everything. But very often the new articles in the criminal code pose new problems and challenges. So what I say is that it is a very dangerous tool, and we should be very careful in terms of using this tool. It should be used when it's necessary, because, for example, the doctors amputate the limb when there are no other methods. The same is about the criminal law. Talking about the responsibilities and liabilities of the Russian teachers in the occupied territories for collaboration, you know that collaboration is the term that is used to show cooperation of the local population with the occupiers. I'm sorry, I will interrupt you. What I'm trying to say, this is the only thing we have. Yes, it is not extrapolated, but the lawyers can state that according to the way it's written, the Russian teachers are participants, are partners in crime, but in real life, how we cannot actually even make them liable for the wrong crossing of the border, illegal crossing of the border. We do not have any protection mechanism towards from the people who come to the occupied territories and erase the identities of Ukrainians. But isn't it part of the international law? Should we be guided by the Ukrainian laws here? The rules of warfare are formulated in the international humanitarian law. There are certain conventions, what can be done, what cannot be done. And you know that these rules also write about the immunity of the combatant. If, for example, the enemy does not violate the rules of war, the enemy cannot be criminally liable for the very fact of participation in the aggression, whether we like it or not, but these norms were not created by us, and Ukraine recognizes this norm as a member of the international community. Yes, when the enemies, the soldiers of the enemy army rape the civilians, kill the civilians, they loot, and when the objects of shelling are not the military infrastructure but the hospital, which happened in Dnipro just a day ago, and when the bomb is dropped on the theater, when it is understandable that there are only civilians here, this is the violation of the rules of war, and the international humanitarian law is involved here. But participation in the
тягне
military aggression
кримінальну відповідальність.
is
Тому
not criminally
це проблема
liable.
з старанням
So
української
the
ідентичності, і
issue
з цією
is with
проблемою
erasing Ukrainian
треба
identity.
будувати шляхи
Yes,
її
that's the problem.
протидії.
We
Єдине,
should
що я
definitely
намагалася
build
сказати,
some
що кримінальне право не єдиний засіб,
protection
і можна
mechanisms,
подивитися за
but the
іншим.
criminal law is probably not only the only
Someone
remedy
had a
we can have.
after No?
Some others. Чи є в нас
Івана. Мікрофон Івані.
Дякую. Я б до того, що Світлана говорила
Thank you. I would add to what Svitlana has said about absence of strategy. This is something I have been thinking about. So we discussed that we probably liberate Donetsk, Luhansk, and the Crimea quicker than we shall have the strategy, what we shall do with them, where we are going to have the teachers who will be willing to teach there, where we are going to have the doctors who will go there, what we are going to do with those territories that have been occupied for 9 years. They do not know what decentralization is, that do not know anything about our institutions created for these 9 years, like National Agency for Prevention of Corruption or many others. For example, if we take the public health sector, is any strategy there? Do they generally discuss how the healthcare system will be renewed at the occupied territories? And what about the justice system in those areas? Whether there are any discussions, what will be happening there? Thank you, Ivano. I just wanted to say some final words to this topic. Today we have had a very nice morning talk with Arsen. I will probably let out a secret here because it was very inspiring. Healthcare system is one of the successful reforms that actually changed the funding principles within the system and is based on a human-centric approach. So when the Crimea and Donbass are deoccupied, the medical assistance should be provided as much as needed. Yes, we have a case of a successful reform, but today Arsen has already said that we should not come there with our solutions. There are people in those areas who are waiting for Ukraine to come back. And despite repressions and pressure, they were thinking about this future. This is our home task. On the one hand, to prepare a certain strategy, on the other hand, to prepare ourselves to be open and immediately ask them what are their needs, what are their expectations. It's not about giving them as many privileges as possible. It's not our obligation to do to give them some investments or to give them some privileges. We have to establish communication, and there shouldn't be any rapid responses. So we have to build the process, and if we build it properly, we shall be able to set good tasks and implement these tasks in a proper way. It's not easier with medicine, but this is a vital function, and therefore this vital function should be provided. And here I rely on the
тиловим
medical
областям підготувати
staff
як таку швидку допомогу ургентну разом з міжнародними організаціями.
to
Але це не
be
означає,
involved in
що
this
одразу
rapid
інсталювати,
response. But
але в
again,
нас є
it
гідна
doesn't
пропозиція
mean
по
that we
медицині.
have to
У нас є
install
Національна
something
служба здоров'я, у
immediately.
нас є
But we
змінені
have a very
підходи і
nice
все.
proposal. We
Щодо
have the
інших
National
систем
Public Health
цього
Service,
гуманітарного
many other
напрямку,
things.
соціального захисту,
Talking about other
освіти,
systems, such
культури,
as education,
науки.
social
Це діалог,
protection,
який ми маємо
science,
заходити,
culture.
і
It
заходити
should be
дуже,
based on
не те, що
dialogue.
не
And
поспішаючи,
this
але
dialogue
в
should
балансі
not
між
be, I
бажанням
would say,
швидких
very
рішень
slow,
і
but
якісного
there should be
продукту,
some balance
цілей, які ми
in
очікуємо.
our attempt to achieve
Дякую. Тоді відповім на свою частину
quick
запитання.
product
Що з
and meeting the
поверненням
expectations.
правосуддя
I will
на
answer
території, які були окуповані?
my part of the question about bringing
Треба
back
розуміти, що
justice
ці території,
system to
особливо
the
ті, які
occupied
під окупацією вже
territories.
10 років,
These
вони, мабуть, вже
certain
забули,
territories
що
that
означає
have been
цей термін
occupied for 10
правосуддя.
years
Там
probably
правосуддя
have
здійснюється на
already
зовсім
forgotten
інших
what justice
засадах.
is,
З
because
тієї
on
інформації,
the
яка
other
до нас
part, justice is
доходить
based on the
на
totally
території
different
так званих
grounds.
ЛНР,
I'm
ДНР
talking
відновили
about Donetsk and
призначення
Luhansk
застосування
People's
смертної кари.
republics. They
І
have already
ряд інших
brought back
практик,
capital
які
punishment
вважалися
and a number of other
давніми і
practices
назавжди забутими.
which are considered to be
Тому треба
outdated
розуміти, що в цій
with us.
частині
So
ці
we have to
спільноти і ця
understand
частина
that
українського
these
суспільства, ми їх далі бачимо частиною
communities,
українського
this part
суспільства,
of the
є
Ukrainian
достатньо
society, and we still
травмованими.
see them as the Ukrainian society,
Я думаю, що
is
це потрібно
severely
робити
traumatized.
Поступово,
I think we
але
should
є одна
be
річ, якої точно не потрібно робити, не
we
додавати
should take
людям
gradual
стресу. Це зараз
steps.
говорили про ветеранів.
What we should definitely not do is not to add up to the stress. And when one official, Ukrainian official, says, take Russian passports because you have to survive, and the other one says, do not take Russian passports because you will be criminally liable. This is something that we should avoid. And first of all, we have to identify the strategy, how we are going to bring these territories back, what activities will be punished, what Ukraine will have to accept. But these questions should be addressed in a systemic way, in a comprehensive way. And the world has a number of models of transitional justice, but all they are based on the right to truth. When things that happened are called their names, when the perpetrators are identified, and depending on the severity of the crime, these perpetrators are brought to justice. And it should be in the very same sequence. Not, for example, not when we bring people to justice and then identify what happened, but we should start with naming, with calling a spade. And it is necessary to do it like this in order to make things right, particularly if we are talking about healthy society.
Any other questions or remarks? I think we're closing to the end of our discussion. I would like to say that it was very telling that we almost didn't talk about what signs of healthy post-war society we want to see. We were talking about what hurts more right now. It was very visible that we are hurting right now, and it's very, very difficult to think about future when you are bleeding, when you are trying to survive. With this thought, I would like to give maybe for one small closing words for our speakers, if you'd like to say something our audience will take with them at the end of this great event.
I'd like to maybe just shortly say that those recipes that we apply today, we have to understand that we are in the moment of the war. So, and we have to be somehow and somewhat rigid and strict and maybe brutal to win the war, because if we do not win it, then we will just be cleansed, we'll be over, okay? And I do believe that as soon as the war is over, as soon as we win it, we will allow for some other purposes to play in, including being more maybe balanced in terms of how we apply various approaches to those people who did something.
Thank you.
As we speak of current survival mode that we are in, even when you are bleeding, you put on tourniquet and you think of the next stabilization point and you think about living. And that's what I strongly believe in, and without that hope and without that dreaming, even with tourniquet, you may be bleeding. So put on the tourniquet, no matter how hard it is. We need to win and we need to live, not survive.
Thank you.
Я можу сказати, що надія є, і про те, що для нас, і насправді, що для нас буде означати ознаками, що суспільство здорове, їх є багато.
There are many signs of a healthy society. For example, millions of our people will come back to Ukraine, back from Europe. All the number of corruption cases, all the number of acquittal cases. So there are different ways to measure it, but we have to agree today what is important for us and what will be the indicators just to stop shelling or to change something inside. This is the issue of values.
Thank you all. Thank you for being here for so long. And bye.